Hello and welcome back to the Mets West podcast, everybody. My name is Eric Ames. It has been a while since I've done an episode because a few reasons, but mainly I've been wanting to do an episode with my buddy Rob Piersall, who is here with us today, and I wanted to talk to someone who knows ball about the trade deadline, trades that have already happened, trades that we want to see happen, kind of a first half of the year recap, and we didn't get to it until now, which is great because literally as we're recording, there's a ton of trade stuff happening. So, with that being said, this is Rob Piersall. Rob and I know each other. Honestly, we know each other just from like Mets fandom stuff on the internet, like Twitter when I used to use Twitter. And yeah, he knows ball. He used to work for Metsmerized. He's written for Sports Illustrated, and now he has a Twitter account. I'm calling it Twitter, refuse to call it X. He has a Twitter account called Ron's Darlings, which is sometimes active. So maybe by the time this goes up, it'll be reactivated. But yeah, Rob, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric. Super excited to see you again and to chat about some Mets baseball.
It's nice to have someone here because I do it by myself every time, and it's fun. I get to like go through my notes and stuff, but I don't get to, just like talk baseball with someone and bounce stuff off each other. So it's a nice addition.
Yeah, well, it's not our first rodeo. We've recorded a few podcast episodes before in the past, so it feels good to be back in the saddle.
That is true. So Rob had a podcast originally called Mets Legends, and they changed the name to Ron's Darlings, and I've been bullying him to get it back started up, which he hasn't had the time for, but I'm going to keep bullying you about it because you and Alex are good at podcasting and talking Mets baseball. So I'll bully you about it. That's it.
Yeah, Alex wants to get back into it for sure. So at some point, we'll definitely do it.
It's hard. Life is busy. There are a lot of podcasts. None of us make any money from this. All right, let's jump into. Okay, well, I mean, it's hard because I want to talk about the first half of the season a little bit and what's been going on, but it's really hard not to just talk about the trade deadline because those things are happening. So honestly, let's just like run through the state of the team currently, and then we'll talk about trade deadline.
Sure, yeah. Well, we could totally reel it back. Obviously, the Mets overall are doing pretty good. They are, at the time of this recording, tied with the Phillies for first place, barring the outcome of Wednesday's game. But regardless of what happens today, the Mets are in good position, right? So no matter what peaks and valleys they've experienced so far this year has led them to be at the top of the NL East or at the very least in a wild card spot. So that's the abridged version, right?
And the extended version is, then how come it doesn't feel like it, Rob?
Well, I think a big thing for that, Eric, is because last year, while it started out very challenging, ended up being one of the more magical seasons in our lifetimes, being both around 30. We've only seen a handful of really good Mets seasons, and in classic Mets fashion, they took us for a ride, and there were so many memorable moments, and I think that it's always going to be hard to replicate that feeling. You look at 2016, after the Mets went to the World Series in 2015, and that was a really good team as well, but it didn't quite have the luster and the charisma from 2015, but obviously they got bounced from the wild card that year or so. But I think when you are able to accomplish what the Mets did in 2024, it's hard to kind of replicate that. So the Mets are doing good, but it's also one of those things where after last year, we expect them to be good now, right? So if they're not world beaters in every facet of the game, it feels like a little bit of a disappointment, right? But you do have to kind of look at it from a 10,000-foot view and realize that they are in pretty good shape. They have one of the best records in baseball, and we'll get into it later, but with the trade deadline approaching, and whenever this episode is posted, there will have been some moves, and there already have been some moves. So it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
And I honestly think a big reason for the season just feeling different is that, like you said, last season the Mets were not very good, and then at the right time, at like the last possible moment, they went on this. You use the word magical. It's the best way to describe it. They went on this absolutely truly magical run, and went all the way to almost the World Series. And then this season, it's been the opposite. They started out hot. They started out hitting, pitching, incredible, and then they've been like 500 for the last 2 months. So it's like you have this feeling of like, I thought they were so good, and now like, oh God, are they actually just mid? And like, this is the real team. So it's hard because their overall record, yeah, I always forget they're like always somewhere around the top five, right? I don't think they've dipped below top five like all season. But it's just like runners in scoring position, the offense. Lindor's cold now. Alonso's cold now. Like, Soto hasn't been OPS 1100 guy yet this year. There's like so many things where, because of the expectations, you feel a little let down, but then you have to, like you said, take a step back, be like, okay, bro, they're in first place.
I mean, really, when you think about it, yes, I think when you make a lot of valid points, and they do have the record they do in part to a cushion that they formed for themselves earlier this year. But you also have to remember that just a few weeks ago, they also lost 10 of 11 games or whatever their really bad stretch was. And then they just won 7 games. So, like I said, there are peaks and valleys. But you also have to remember last year that when everything culminated, everything was going really well at the same time. So you had Jose Iglesias, our former Latin pop star. Well, he's still a Latin pop star, but he's not the Mets Latin pop star.
He's not ours, right?
He had the best the best year of his career last year. I was looking at the numbers earlier. He had the highest in his career wins above replacement last year than in any other season of his career. And then Pete Alonso getting hot after a pretty bad season and having a good postseason. Mark Vientos, who really took a step forward and was someone the Mets leaned heavily on, and Francisco Lindor single-handedly kind of taking them all the way and being their leader. There has been a little bit of a regression, but the hope is that they can still get hot. All you really need is to get in. We saw it last year. Their backs against the wall. Pete Alonso hitting that home run against Milwaukee in the 11th hour. And they really eroded that to within 2 games of the World Series. So if the Mets can just get in, then they have as good a chance as anybody. And you look at around the league, no one's really running away with it at this point in time. The Blue Jays have been hot, but they had some bad losses this week. Detroit, who was for the whole season really one of the best teams in baseball, has been on a really bad stretch where they've lost 10 of 11, 11 of 12, or whatever it is for them. So the Mets, while they do have their flaws, every team is flawed. And I think part of it, too, is that it can be a little bit magnified because we're following them on a daily basis. But if you ask any team, I'm sure they could give you the rundown of why they think their team is flawed or doomed or whatever it is. So,
yeah. And that's a good point. You know, not only are we watching every game, most games, we're in a Discord chatting with, 20 other people who are just as invested, dare I say, addicted to the Mets. And then you have me, after every game, I make a point to go to TikTok and Instagram and I record a little minute and a half thing about the game. So I talk to my dad and he's like, oh, Mets pretty good. Because he's just watching some games. Oh, Mets are pretty good. Oh, first place, second, okay, pretty good. And I'm like, but the runners in scoring position and the bullpen and I'm just and he's like, okay, but the record's pretty good. We're so on the macro zoomed in level with everything, just judging everything so harshly. And and then go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, I mean, people have such short-term memory because last year, with how badly they started, that was bad. The Mets were not a good team. And you have people, and social media could be such an echo chamber and very, what's the word I'm looking for? Toxic, that you have people after these bad losses or rough stretches that talk about how this is the worst they've seen the Mets ever and this and that. And it's just simply not true. It's just not. And I remember, and you do too, Eric, we're around the same age, but many Mets teams that we grew up with were not even competitive from the beginning of the year. And we saw a lot of bad teams and the Wilpons cheaping out on fielding a good team. And for the Mets to be in the position they are, for people to say that, I think is just a little bit silly. But it's recency bias, and I think that we all kind of suffer from that a little bit.
And it is partially, or more than partially, that expectation that you mentioned before, right? Because it's like, okay, well, yeah, obviously it's not the worst I've ever seen the Mets play, but it is frustrating when Brandon Nimmo, Francisco Lindor, Pete Alonso, Juan Soto, like, can't do anything. Like, when you have this core, and that's the biggest problem. So, like, if we zoom in on this past series, the Mets just got swept by the Padres, and you look at why, right? It's like game one, offense was good. You know, like, they actually, Mark Vientos, he's back, hit that grand slam. I joked in my recap of game one that Mark Vientos cannot stop hitting grand slams in Southern California. It's just, that's what he does. But he's been cold all year. He's been legitimately bad all year. So it's like, okay, he's starting to heat up. Offense is good. What happens? The bullpen blows the game. Okay, that happens. It was a hard-fought game against a good team. And then they score 1 run in game 2 and no runs in game 3 and get swept. So it's like they're very streaky, and they haven't been able to put everything together at the same time. Like, pitching's good, hitting's good. They're kind of back and forth. And yeah, it's led at the beginning of the season. It wasn't really all clicking. I want to say it was, but the offense was still, runners in scoring position has been bad all season. And I think I'm kind of just hoping there's still enough time in this year for everything to click, and then they'll really be world beaters, like you said.
Sure, and there is enough time, right? That's what we have to remember, is that you look back at 2015, a little bit of different circumstances. Neither them nor the Nationals were really lighting the world on fire, but they got Cespedes, who was the right piece at the deadline, and they took care of business where they needed to take care of business. Obviously, the circumstances were a little bit different in 2015. There wasn't as much of an opportunity in the postseason, but that kind of makes it a little bit better almost, because the Mets are in pretty good position to make the playoffs. I don't really think there's a world where they don't. Famous last words, perhaps. Don't go back to this if that happens. No. But there's a path for them no matter what. Even if they don't make the playoffs as a National League East champion, there's 3 wild card spots. So they can easily, or maybe not so easily because we watch the Mets, but realistically, they could take one of those spots, right? So they're in good position right now. Unless the bottom really falls out, we're anticipating this team will be a playoff team this year, and I think they will. But that year, they had a really good last 2 months. So you might see where the Mets get a couple good bullpen arms. Maybe they add a starting pitcher at the deadline. They add another bat, and things kind of click for them. So there's definitely enough time. But even still, if you make it to the playoffs, you can get hot then, and you can make a run. Mm-hmm. So it obviously these are kind of it's crunch time for sure. But I think that overall, there's enough time to still figure out their woes.
Yeah, and like you said, they keep hovering around first, second place, and that's how the year ends. Then great, you're in the playoffs. And like you said, anything can happen. We saw that last year. So yeah, let's talk about the trade deadline, because honestly, like, from the time we hopped on this call and started figuring out like how to technologically make this podcast episode work, between that and starting the episode, a bunch of stuff happened. Totally. which is pretty cool. So,
well, where do you want to start? Should we go back to, we might as well start with the acquisition of Gregory Soto because that was the first one.
Yep.
So what were your thoughts on that move? And we've seen him pitch in a couple games so far. What are your thoughts on Gregory Soto?
So I've talked about this on the podcast, on social media. I'm a Met fan, first and foremost. I am not good at, like, especially the American League. I'm just like, I know Gregory Soto's name. I really know his name because leading up to the trade deadline, Mets fans have been talking about acquiring him. They wanted to target him. But I'm just like, I don't know, unless the Mets face them often. So, like, and at least I know a lot of players. As you go further out, I know them less and less. But I know Gregory Soto, people wanted to target him in a package with Cedric Mullins, which obviously did not happen. So all I know is that he's a lefty. Career ERA is pretty solid. Not incredible, but also he's not a schlub. And what I've seen from the first 2 games has not been bad. He has an issue with control, is what I read, which is obviously Mets pitchers this year have had control issues. We feel like some guys shouldn't have control issues, and like now they do, which has been a bit odd. But yeah, Soto pitched in game 2 of this Padres series, and he lost the game, but it wasn't terrible. Like you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, so I will admit I am turning 30 in a couple weeks, and I don't stay up as late as I once did. I'm usually in bed by around 9 o'clock, so I caught the first couple innings of the first 2 games of this series, and I know it, man, but even punks grow up sometimes.
That's true.
But so it was a lot of me waking up at 1:30 in the morning to use the restroom and then checking my phone bleary-eyed and seeing that the Mets lost in the fashions that they did. Both were equally as jarring in different ways. But I saw that Soto was the losing pitcher. I didn't get a chance to watch him. I really liked what I saw from him in the San Francisco series. I think that if they can hone in on his control, that he can be a valuable piece. And I think that what David Stearns did is he brought in a left-hander that's been in the game for a long time, that has really good stuff, and that he probably thinks they could fiddle with to kind of get him to be a little bit more dialed in the respect of being not walking as many people, not being as erratic. So we'll see what happens with that. But you look now, and your left-handed pitching situation looks a lot better than it did at the beginning of the year. Or maybe not at the very beginning of the year, because the Mets did have A.J. Minter, who was very good in the limited action we saw him. But you had A.J. Minter and Danny Young, and then you had Danny Young and kind of a committee of other left-handed relievers. So now your left-handed core in the bullpen of Brooks Raley, who had another really good outing today, has looked very good in the few games we've seen him since coming back from Tommy John surgery, and you pair him with someone like Soto, you have 2 good lefties in the bullpen now. And so I liked the deal. From my friends who are a little bit more prospect savvy than myself, the Mets didn't give up too much. Wellington Aracena is a guy that people that I know and respect their opinions on prospects liked, but it's a guy that you kind of have to give up in a deal to get an established reliever like Soto. And the other player whose name I'm kind of blanking on right now, he's a guy that they say the Mets are kind of drafting at this point 3 or 4 guys with similar skill sets in every draft. So it's a guy who's pretty expendable. But I liked the deal, and I don't think they really got burned. So that's a win for me, for sure.
Cameron Foster is his name.
Cameron Foster. I was going to call him Parker, and I knew that wasn't correct.
That's close enough.
I got Spider-Man on the brain, I think.
Is it because, can you see Spider-Man behind me?
Oh, you're subliminal messaging me.
I have like multiple Spider-Man things behind me on my shelf. But I'm a New York guy. Spider-Man's a Met fan, canonically. Anyway, again, prospects. I know the big name prospects. So then, like, if we move ahead to Tyler Rogers, we were texting before we started recording. And I was like, is it an overpay? Because like I know Drew Gilbert, and Blade Tidwell, obviously big prospect. He's pitched in the majors this year, and you're like, no. And it kind of, and then I was reading more in between, and people are like, yeah, well, these are big name prospects, but they haven't actually panned out yet. And I didn't realize how old they both were for big name prospects. Usually you have big name prospects like Francisco Alvarez, and he comes up when he's like 21, and Acuna comes up when he's like 22. And you have these guys that you're like, okay, they're trying them out in the major leagues, and they're young. Then you have Drew Gilbert, who's 25. They bring him up to AAA this season, and he stinks. And it's like, okay, so his name is recognizable, but his game isn't quite there yet. How much do I actually care about losing these prospects?
Well, I think a big part of it, too, is that Mets fans, I think the knee-jerk reaction when you see a trade and when you see prospects, especially when it's multiple prospects, is that the knee-jerk reaction is to think automatically that the Mets got fleeced. And like you said, these are big-name prospects, quote-unquote. Drew Gilbert was the headliner of the Justin Verlander trade 2 summers ago. And Blade Tidwell is a guy that they drafted high, and we've seen him in limited action. And Jose Butto has been a serviceable relief pitcher for them. He started a little bit. He's pitched in high leverage situations at certain points in his career. He's been a long man out of your bullpen. So I think people, and I think there's also a little bit of PTSD with doing a multiplayer trade with the Giants after the Darren Ruff trade a few years ago. But I think we need to remember that it's a different regime. David Stearns is a lot more calm, cool, and collected. And I think, truthfully, not a dig at Billy Epler, but is a little bit more knowledgeable and isn't going to get got and make a knee-jerk trade or make a trade because, and I'm not saying the Drew Gilbert trade was, the Darren Ruff trade seemed like it was a little bit. He overpaid a lot for Tyler Naquin, which I thought was a little silly back then. It didn't really seem, and I think Brodie Van Wagenen, and if we're going to even go a little bit further back, you had a lot of GMs who didn't have a really great pulse on the farm system. David Stearns, I think, is a little bit more tactful when it comes to that. So I also don't really trust that Buster Posey, who I don't really have as high of opinion of as a executive as I did as a player, is going to fleece David Stearns and the Mets. We knew that relief pitching was going to be a premium. The Mets got a guy who, to this point in the season, has a sub-2 ERA, gives you a little bit of a different vibe out of the bullpen. He has a funky delivery. He's a submariner. Leading up to Edwin Diaz, probably going to give hitters a little bit of a fit. Taylor Rogers with his herky-jerky motion, and then Diaz coming in as a flamethrower afterwards, kind of gives you a little bit of a different dynamic out there. So, did they give up a little bit of too much prospect capital? I don't know if I'd say that, but I'm not going to lose sleep over the trade. As you mentioned, Drew Gilbert is 24 or 25. People know him from the Justin Verlander trade. He was at one point a highly touted prospect, but you peel back the layers of the onion a little bit. Drew Gilbert has flashed some power in the minor leagues, but at the time of the trade was batting .249. Not that I think batting average is really the be-all, end-all, but he was batting .249, and his on-base percentage was maybe .349, and his OPS was sub 800. And that's playing in a really hitter-friendly league. So I think that I'm not going to lose sleep over trading him. Blade Tidwell, I think at his peak, will be a 5th starter, maybe, but also as someone who's maybe destined for the bullpen. So it'll be interesting to see what it shakes out with him. And I think Butto, losing him definitely will be a little bit sad. I was a little bit emotional watching him choked up and crying a little bit as he was hugging his teammates. You get connected to these guys. You watch them day in and day out. He was a part of the 2024 magical run. So that's definitely sad, but I think you do have to make those tough calls sometimes. And kind of calling back to what I was talking about earlier, right now, there's not a team that really feels like they're running away with it. And the Mets have a top 10 farm system in baseball. They have really good pieces in place, and they can make a run for a World Series title this year. And I think that that's what they're trying to do. In his first year as the Mets president of baseball operations, David Stearns was a little bit less aggressive in the respect of the moves that he made in free agency going into 2024. There wasn't a massive acquisition. He signed some players like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino, who both ended up being probably better than what was even anticipated, but he didn't make that big splash. And I think it was a lot of just absorbing what the team was like and getting to learn what the team was like and the farm system. And it was his first year. And so this year, after last year, the expectations are a little bit higher. And I think that now is the time that the Mets do need to kind of dig into that farm system a little bit and get players that are going to help them in the here and now. So I think it's a trade that some people might not like on the surface, but I don't think it's a trade that is going to come back to bite them like a Pete Crow Armstrong type trade. And if it does, and Drew Gilbert ends up being that player, then good for him. You know, he was a guy that's bounced around a couple times, and I do hope that he gets a chance to stick around in San Francisco now.
And you have to remember a few things. Like, first of all, a lot of trades like this are determined by the actual outcome, because absolutely no one is going to care about Drew Gilbert if Tyler Rogers is incredible and the Mets win the World Series, or even just get pretty deep and then he re-signs for a couple of years because, you know, the vibes are so good in Queens. So like, if the player and the team after the trade, they have success, no one's going to care. It's the same thing with Pete Crow Armstrong. Like, who talks about Pete Crow Armstrong? Everyone that's not a Met fan. Fans of other teams, reporters who are trying to stir the pot. Like, we don't care because it's just like, oh yeah, it's fine. We're over it. It doesn't really matter to us at this point.
I care a little bit, but that's okay. I didn't really like that trade when it went down. So I could talk about that with you. We could do another episode on Pete Crow Armstrong specifically. But I will go on the record saying that I enjoyed Javier Baez's time as a Met, but I think that was still bad practice in the moment. But I will let you continue because I can go on a tangent about it.
I think things just happen like that in sports, especially baseball. And also it's like you said, it's a different regime. It's just the whole thing, in my opinion, I'm like, it doesn't reflect on our team currently. Because you know who wouldn't make that move? Probably David Stearns. He would probably know better than that. And that was my second point. And my second point was, we need to remember that David Stearns is the guy that, remember when there was like a glimpse of hope that the Mets might actually get him as their main executive? How amazing, how much Mets fans were clamoring over even the possibility of that. So now he's here. They got the guy to be the president of baseball operations, and it's like, well, we just got to trust him now because he's the guy where we were all like, if they could get David Stearns, that would change the course of the franchise. And they got David Stearns, so just let him cook, you know?
Well, I think that, and I think it's funny when the Mets are not doing so well and they're going through these rough patches and people take that aggression out on David Stearns. And I think there's a little bit of this weird perspective from some Mets fans that David Stearns is like dumpster diving and he's not really making that, he's not pulling the trigger for a big fish. But you have to remember, and truthfully, I think it's unfair when people say, well, David Stearns wasn't involved with Soto. David Stearns wasn't involved with Alonso. First of all, were you in the room with them with these discussions? No.
He's the president of baseball operations.
So wouldn't you say it's silly that people give Cohen the credit when it comes to players like Alonso and Soto, but when David Stearns brings in guys like Sean Manaea and Luis Severino. And truthfully, you could even talk about Clay Holmes. I know that Clay Holmes is kind of sputtering a little bit now, running out of gas a little bit. I think Clay Holmes, when you flip the calendar to next year, he's going to have those innings under his belt. He's going to be able to build up a little bit more. And truthfully, he's been a serviceable starter. I think they should probably move him to the bullpen for the stretch run and acquire another starting pitcher, kind of limit his innings and everything. But why is it that only Stearns gets credit for the reclamation projects, but when the Mets make a big move, it's all Cohen? I think that's a little bit silly. But you look at what he did in Milwaukee. He was working with a limited budget there, and he churned out some really competitive teams. So I think he deserves the benefit of the doubt until he gives us reason to not get the benefit of the doubt.
And to answer your question about, how come Stearns doesn't get the credit sometimes, and he gets the hate and everything, and it's because sports fans are the most irrational people on planet Earth. And I say that as one, because what does Sarah always mocks me when I'm watching baseball, because there are things I say all the time, over the course of our almost decade-long relationship that she just observes, and I'm like, I think I'm a rational person, and I know I'm a rational person, but I think it translates to me as a sports fan. But sometimes I black out a little. I don't realize that I'm screaming at the TV. Sarah always mocks me saying, throw strikes, throw the ball in the zone. And the other thing I say on the other side of baseball is hit the ball. Why are you swinging at hit the ball? And I'm like, wow, I do that. And I don't realize. So I'm one of those irrational sports fans without even realizing it. And that's why people, they can't have a normal view on Cohen and Stearns and the team or anything. We're just like this.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like a New York minute, right? It's like, what are you doing for me right now? So when things are good and the Mets are cruising, then things are great. But the moment something doesn't go exactly as planned, it's a lot of fingers pointing and people that you got to fire everyone, and it's, you want to throw so-and-so under the bus. So, but yeah, it's New York sports for you. I don't know if Rockies fans are really like that. I'm sure they're just battered down and defeated because their owner is the worst. But
as someone who lives in Colorado and goes to always see the Mets play the Rockies here, and occasionally go to Rockies games when they're playing other teams, I can assure you 95% of Rockies fans are just there to drink beer and have a good time and enjoy the weather. The baseball that happens at Coors Field is 1,000% an afterthought, but it's cool. It's a fun scene. Hopefully you can come out here one year and catch a game with me, because it is a great place to watch baseball.
Yeah, I'd love to, man. So why don't we get into, at this point, the next move that the Mets made today? And
there's one, possibly the biggest one, right?
Possibly the biggest one. It's a move that I like quite a bit. And Eric actually broke the news to me while I was fiddling with my headphones, trying to get them to sync to my laptop. But the Mets acquired Ryan Helsley from the St. Louis Cardinals for a trio of prospects: Nate Dome, Jesus Baez, and a lower level prospect that I don't remember their name. But
yeah,
I don't know if you have it up, but
I do somewhere, but
it's not important. It wasn't. They didn't give up Jonah Tong. They didn't give up Nolan McLean. And truthfully, I think that it's a little bit of a response from Stearns, because the Phillies just acquired Yoan Duran from the Minnesota Twins. So you have the Phillies acquiring probably the most sought-after player at the deadline, at least from the pitching perspective. And David Stearns retorts with acquiring one of the other best relievers that was available, Ryan Helsley. So I think that it's going to be a real bloodbath going down the finish for the Mets and the Phillies. But you look at Ryan Helsley, and he had 49 saves last year. And in the last 3 seasons, he has had, I believe, a sub-2 ERA, a low-2 ERA, and a mid-2 ERA. And this year, I think he's sitting at 3, but he's a really electric arm, and I'm very excited because now your bullpen is pretty stacked on paper. You have Gregory Soto, you have Tyler Rogers, you have Taylor also got traded today too. Funny enough, his brother.
Really?
Yeah, to Cincinnati or to Pittsburgh. I think from Cincinnati to Pittsburgh. It was in the Ke'Bryan Hayes trade.
Okay.
And now you have Ryan Helsley, and then that's leading up to Diaz too, and that's not even including your Reed Garretts of the world. That's not including your Huascar Brazabons of the world, who will be back at some point. He's down in the minors right now. But your bullpen has a much better complexion today than it did even 24 hours ago. So I'm very pleased with the Ryan Helsley deal, and Ryan Stanek too. So
and Raley
and Brooks Raley. It's a lot better than
man.
It's a lot not so bad, especially when you consider that a week ago we were seeing Alex Carrillo and Zach Pop and no disrespect to Rico Garcia, but Rico Garcia. So I will take it. And I'm curious to see, I mean, at this point you have to figure the Mets are probably done adding to their bullpen, unless of course there's a name that falls into their laps. I think that there's a chance that they could still acquire someone else. But now I wonder if they shift their outlook to I think really they got to get a bat first. I think that's probably the next step. But I'm very interested to see what's going to happen in the next 20 or so hours, 22 hours.
So, top comment on the Reddit thread about the Ryan Helsley deal. It says, "Oops, all closers."
Well, yeah. I mean, Stanek has closed in his career, and I don't know if Tyler Rogers has.
Based on that comment, I'm assuming this person knows that he has at some point. But either way, it's like at least they're speaking to the quality of the pitchers. Like now you have a few legit guys that you can put in and really trust them to lock it down. I mean, obviously Diaz is the epitome of that feeling. When he comes in, you're like, cool, we won. Even if he walks a guy, he hits a guy in the face, and you're just like, he's got it. And then for the most part, he does.
Well, I think, too, David Stern's approach is obviously if they don't acquire a starting pitcher, which I think they probably will, at the very least, I think they're going to get an innings eater of sorts. Might not be a flashy name, but David Stearns is looking at the complexion of the rotation right now, and you have Sean Manaea, who's still kind of building himself back up. You have Clay Holmes, who's kind of reaching his innings threshold. You have Kodai Senga, who's had bouts of injuries the last couple years. You don't know if he's going to remain healthy. And then beyond that, you have Frankie Montas, who's been injured a lot in his career, hasn't really looked amazing so far as a Met. So I think that his viewpoint is, well, if Clay Holmes is only going to give us 4 innings or Frankie Montas is only going to give us 4 innings, then we might as well have a parade of relief pitchers who are throwing gas and are going to get us to the finish line on a daily basis. If that means that you have Holmes go 4 and then Gregory Soto comes in the 5th and Stanek comes in the 6th and Rogers comes in the 7th and then Helsley comes on in the 8th and then Diaz comes on in the 9th. I mean, you know, it's pretty scary on paper. So I'm really liking it. I think that those 2 arms that they added today, along with Soto, it's pretty exciting. But I think really, and I think that the first thing that I thought of when you told me that Helsley became a Met is that I think this is the contingency plan for when Diaz ultimately is no longer a Met next year. So I think that Helsley is obviously also a free agent at the end of this year, but I think that Diaz probably is going to opt out of his contract, and I think that he's going to try to get one more really big payday. And I don't foresee that David Stearns is going to dole out that kind of money for a relief pitcher, especially when he has found some diamonds in the rough and when you can acquire guys like this at the trade deadline. So I think that there's a chance Diaz could be back, but I think that acquiring Helsley also, there could be a hope that next year, if Diaz does leave, that you have a good chance of now retaining Ryan Helsley. That's my perspective on it.
Can I tell you something embarrassing? I did not realize that this was, well, it's not the end of Edwin Diaz's contract, but I didn't realize that the guaranteed contract ends here, and then there's an option for 26 through 28. I didn't know that until just now, and I'm a little ashamed. But
it's okay.
It's a very good point you made. So I like that you say on paper, right? Because that's our contingency plan as people on the internet talking about this kind of thing for if it's not good, right? Because it's like, well, on paper, I'm protecting myself. On paper, it's good. And then you have I looked up Edwin Diaz, right? Because I was like, oh, when you were saying that, I was like, his contract, really? How did I not know that? Ben Verlander tweets, when this dude tweets for years, I'm like, can you just not say that? Just either it's like the Shohei thing where he's weirdly obsessed with Shohei, whatever, or he's defending his brother and it's just feels a little icky and awkward. But he tweets, the New York Mets now have the best bullpen in all of Major League Baseball. Tyler Rogers, Ryan Helsley, Edwin Diaz. My God, that happened fast. I'm like, bro, can you just not say that? Because I just feel like the vibes, you're making the vibes bad.
Sure. Well, yeah, I mean, that's a big thing as Mets fans, and I think probably largely as baseball fans as a whole, but I think it's a little bit more so when it comes to the Mets that it's kind of like Murphy's Law almost, that what bad thing can happen will happen, right? It's always kind of like we're waiting for the sky to fall. And so, yes, on paper, this does look good. And on paper, Drew Gilbert is not going to be a stud. But these things change, and that's why you play the games, as the old adage goes.
He could turn into Drew Pete Crow Armstrong Gilbert.
It's true. He could. Maybe they'll just merge as human beings and become like Exodia or something like that.
They'd be the whitest outfielder to ever exist. Okay, so with all that being said, I do agree about starting pitching because I've been frankly bitching about it the entire year. Here in TikTok recaps, I'm just like, none of our pitchers can go more than 5 innings. David Peterson, he had the shutout.
How did I forget about Peterson?
It just happens.
He's the most reliable. Reliable as they come. How could I have forgotten him?
He's the only guy that I feel like might go past 5 innings any given game, and everyone else, I'm just like, I mean, hopefully Manaea and Senga, once they get through they're kind of both still rehabbing, building back up. Hopefully they can get those innings back, but they definitely need one more solid starting pitcher. And then when it comes to a bat, where do you see a bat fitting into this lineup? Because I know a few weeks ago, people were talking about Eugenio Suarez and Zach Gallen as a package from the Diamondbacks. No idea what the Diamondbacks are thinking. Suarez just got hit on the hand yesterday, and that could completely change the trading deadline. But yeah, where do you see a bat going in the lineup? Who gets replaced?
Well, I think the uncomfortable truth of this trade deadline is that I would not be surprised if the Mets did part ways with a Brett Beatty or a Ronnie Mauricio or a Mark Vientos, because truthfully, I mean, you do have some wiggle room there where Brett Beatty's played second base and Mark Vientos can DH. He could play not very well, but third base. He could pick up a first baseman's glove in a pinch. Maybe you hold on to Vientos in case Pete Alonso's not back next year and you try him out there. Ronnie Mauricio, decent at third base. I would have to dig into his deeper metrics. I don't know where he ranks in DRS and everything, but watching him, and a boomer thing to say, but he passes the eye test a little bit. But I think that, truthfully, I mean, I know the Mets have kind of been linked to Luis Robert on the White Sox. I think that could maybe happen. I think it'd be funny if they got Luis Robert and then Adrian Hauser back in that trade. That'd be pretty funny. But I think that if you want an outfielder, you're going to maybe have to part with one of those good infielders. Maybe a bat becomes available that no one's really been talking about. But I think Robert fits this team well. He's a former top prospect. I think that the Mets could maybe get more out of him than the White Sox are. Do you trade one of those guys for Robert, though? I personally wouldn't. I don't know what it's going to take, but I think that Robert's definitely an option. But I think really what you have to do is you got to upgrade in the outfield. And Tyrone Taylor is as sure-handed as they come defensively, but he couldn't hit himself out of a wet paper bag. And Jeff McNeil is a guy who's really just better suited to play around the diamond as kind of a super utility guy. So I don't know how comfortable I really feel going into the playoffs with just those two guys. And I don't really know how comfortable I feel going into the postseason with this current iteration of their offense. So I think we're going to see some movement probably. Who that's going to be, your guess is as good as mine. Really, I don't know. Who are you thinking the Mets are going to target?
Well, what's frustrating is that, I wish the Mets offense was good enough to just hide Tyrone Taylor at the bottom of the lineup.
Sure.
Like, I wish.
Well, you're the sum of your parts, right? You're the sum of your parts. So if 1 through 8's hitting and you have Tyrone Taylor who can only play defense, it doesn't matter so much. But when Juan Soto's streaking or Francisco Lindor is streaking and Alonso's in his head and he's striking out, and then you have guys around Taylor at the bottom of the lineup like Luis Torrens when he was playing regularly, or you have a Vientos who's really struggling, it becomes a little bit more prominent to see the struggles of someone like Tyrone Taylor. So if you're firing on all cylinders 1 through 8, it doesn't matter if Tyrone Taylor can't hit. He could really help you with defense. Unfortunately, that's not the case for the Mets right now.
Not at all. Hasn't been all year. And, you mentioned Luis Robert, who I could have sworn his name was Luis Robert, but I guess he said it's Robert. I don't know. But you mentioned him, and it's like, well, you look at his numbers, and they're bad. They're like only slightly better than Tyrone Taylor's. But then you backtrack and say, or not backtrack, you back up and say, well, he was a top prospect. He's had a few very good seasons. Like, the potential is there. And then you start thinking, well, do you think because he's playing on the White Sox, he just like, an athlete would never say this. Athletes don't consciously do this, but playing for a bad team has to make you less motivated. It just, when you play for a team where you feel hopeless every year, I'm sure it eats away at you and you're just not the best player you can be. And I wonder if getting traded to the Mets, aside from their coaching and, whatever tools the Mets have that, I don't know, that Steve Cohen has spent money on, whether it's people or resources, combine that with being like, oh, well, now I'm on a team where we're probably going to make the playoffs. We're probably going to make the playoffs most seasons moving forward, we hope. I wonder if that inspires a player like that to get closer to their potential.
Well, you look at a bad team, and the White Sox are a good example because they lost 120 games last year and are owned by one of the worst people in the league, Jerry Reinsdorf. And why does a team stink, right? There are instances where a team stinks perhaps because the pieces don't click. We've seen teams that are quote unquote super teams, or a franchise goes out and adds. I think a lot about the Marlins in 2012, where they had Hanley Ramirez and they got Jose Reyes and they had Carlos Lee and they had Mark Burley and they had whoever else was on that team. They didn't really pan out. They had a lot of talent, and there's been instances where you have a lot of stars on the team and it just doesn't work, right? So that's one instance. But I think, why does a team like the White Sox stink? Because from front to back, they're probably pretty disorganized. Their technology that they use and their systems are probably pretty antiquated. And I don't think they're probably getting the most out of the guys that they have. So you look at someone like Luis Robert, who, yes, maybe he's a little bit jaded. I'm sure it's probably not fun to play for a team that's bad year in and year out. But could a team like the Mets take a Luis Robert and maybe get more out of him, or notice some sort of tweak that they can make with his swing or something that could make him better? And I think that that's something that David Stearns would have to really try to pinpoint like, hey, this guy has a hole in his swing that I think that with a slight tweak, we could maybe get him to be a 30 home run guy or whatever, or what have you. So I think that his struggles with the White Sox do need to be taken with a grain of salt. And I don't know if he is ever going to be the star that people once anticipated, but he might be a guy that, yes, change of scenery, comes to a winning team, is playing on. He doesn't have to be the star on the Mets. He just has to be a serviceable piece.
Good.
Yeah, he just has to be good, right? So I think that could definitely make a player improve. There's a lot of situations people are unique, so who the hell knows? Maybe he's just not very good. There's also another option.
And you never know. Maybe if he gets traded to the Mets, he'll start working with fan favorite hitting coaches Eric Chavez and Jeremy Barnes on his swing. Or maybe the Mets medical staff realizes that one of his legs is a little bit too long, and he has a little Edwin Diaz turnaround and becomes a 900 OPS guy batting sixth or something in a incredibly deep Mets lineup. So,
well, from your lips to God's ears, man.
That is the most Jewish thing I've heard a non-Jewish person ever say. Maybe I'm just like mistaken that that's a thing that only Jews say, but I've only ever heard like old Jewish people say it.
I am an old Jewish person. I'm not Jewish.
He's appropriating my culture. No, just kidding. Okay, so
canceled. Just cancel the episode.
I think we could probably stop there. I mean, that was a very good conversation. I'm excited to see what happens next. And the trade deadline is like less than 24 hours from now.
Yeah,
right? Isn't it like 4 p.m. Eastern?
6 p.m. Eastern. 6 p.m.
6
Eastern.
p.m. Eastern.
So thankfully I'll be able to listen to Evan Roberts and Tiki Barber on the radio and breaking down whatever happens. So, but yeah, been a good trade deadline so far, and I'm excited to see what will happen when the dust is settled tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm excited to see these guys put on a Mets uniform and get going. It's always like a little bit of it's always like a little bit of a tease, I feel like, with the trade deadline, because a player gets traded and you're like, yeah, we get to see him tomorrow, but then there's usually like a game or two delay before they actually, and you're like, but I want us, and you get like so stoked, and then they don't play quite yet. But I'm excited to see what happens. Rob, thank you so much for finally being on the show. I'm glad we could do this, because I don't think I would have gotten through a first half recap and trade deadline by myself. I would just be like looking things up and being like, I don't really know. This is one of those things I need to talk to someone about.
Yeah, Eric, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I am very much excited to see it on the playback.
So you can find Rob sometimes if you go on Twitter, or X if you're one of those people. Go on Twitter at Ron's Darlings, Mets memes, hopefully a podcast coming back at some point, discourse from Rob. If you watch this episode, you'd be like, that Rob Piersall guy, really level-headed, like he's got a good head on his shoulders. If you watch him tweet during Mets games, you'd be like, you're a little more of a negative Nancy when the Mets are down and you're live tweeting about it. I think you're much more level-headed in person.
I think that it's very easy to take to social media or a group chat and express your frustrations.
Absolutely.
But, yeah. So, yeah, I guess you're probably right. Eric calls me out a lot for it, so he keeps me in check.
Go follow Ron's Darlings.
Or just come see me in person, truthfully. Just come see me in person.
Yeah.
Come find me.
His address
Find me at your local coffee shop. My address is redacted. My social security number is redacted.
You can say it. You don't need to redact it. We'll just,
I don't have a social security number. I am the beginning and the end. I am the alpha and the omega.
And you burned your fingerprints off when you were 7 years old because you didn't want anyone to be able to find you.
I'm a runaway from some weird cult of Yankee dumb, so I had to escape it.
Yankee dumb. All right, well let's kill the bits right there because we will literally go another hour just with bits. Thank you so much for watching. You can follow me at Mets West Pod on TikTok, Instagram, and obviously subscribe if you're not subscribed. And I will see you in the next episode. Let's go Mets!